During World War II, there was one war machine that filled American soldiers with both hope and fear. It was the Sherman tank, the backbone of victory, but also known as the steel coffin, a vehicle that could save an entire battle or incinerate its crew in seconds. Nicknamed the Ronson because it lit on the first try, once hit, the Sherman almost always went up in flames. In this video, we'll uncover the truth about the Sherman, why it was produced in such massive numbers, why thousands of crews never came home, and how a flawed machine still became a decisive factor in the Allied victory. When the United States entered World War II in December 1941, its army faced a brutal reality. It had no modern tank that could stand toe-to-toe with the armored monsters already rolling across Europe. The German panzer divisions had conquered half the continent, and the Soviet T-34 was proving itself on the Eastern Front. America needed an answer, fast. The solution was the M4 Sherman. Designed in 1941 and rushed into mass production the following year, the Sherman was not the strongest tank on paper. Weighing around 30 tons, it was lighter than most German armor. Its 75mm gun was adequate against older Panzers, but struggled against the newer Panthers and Tigers. Its armor was thin compared to the thick steel plates of its enemies. Yet the Sherman was not built to dominate in single combat. It was built to be reliable, versatile, and, most importantly, produced in staggering numbers. American factories could turn out thousands every month, and the tank was designed so that parts could be swapped and repairs made quickly in the field. It could be shipped across oceans, driven off landing craft, and keep up with infantry across mud, snow, and shattered cities. To the high command, the Sherman was a triumph of logistics and engineering pragmatism. It gave the Allies a tank that could be everywhere at once. But for the crews who would ride into battle inside its thin steel hull, the birth of the Sherman was a double-edged sword. It offered mobility in numbers, but also carried with it the terrible reputation of being too light, too flammable, and too vulnerable when facing Germany's armored elite. When the Sherman finally met the German panzers in combat, the myth of its invincibility shattered almost instantly. What had been hailed as the backbone of the Allied advance quickly became, for the men inside, a death trap on tracks. On the hedgerows of Normandy in 1944, Sherman crews learned the hard truth. German 75mm and 88mm guns could pierce their armor from over a mile away. Panthers and Tigers often fired the first shot long before the Sherman even spotted them. A single hit could rip through the thin steel hull, ignite the fuel tanks, and turn the entire vehicle into a fireball. Inside, 5 men had less than 10 seconds to scramble out, if they were lucky. German soldiers gave the Sherman a mocking nickname, Tommy Cooker, a cruel reference to how easily it roasted its crew alive. American tankers themselves called it the Ronson, after the cigarette lighter advertised to light every time. Once struck, the Sherman often did exactly that. It lit up, burning fiercely until only a charred shell remained. For Allied crews, the battlefield became a grim lottery of survival. In many units, casualty rates soared. Some Sherman divisions reported losing more than half their tanks in a single day of combat. Veterans recalled the haunting sound of ammunition cooking off inside a burning tank. Explosions rattling like fireworks while their comrades screamed for help. Many could not be saved. The psychological toll was enormous. Tankers knew their odds were stacked against them. Facing a Tiger or Panther, they were often told to flank, swarm, or simply overwhelm with numbers, tactics that demanded courage but also cost lives. One American commander grimly admitted, "It takes 5 Shermans to kill a Tiger." And usually 4 are lost in the process. The horror was not confined to Europe. In the Pacific, Sherman crews faced the ferocity of Japanese anti-tank guns, mines, and suicidal infantry attacks. Jungle terrain and volcanic islands offered no cover, and once again the Sherman's vulnerability meant every battle carried the risk of fiery death. Yet despite the carnage, the tankers fought on. They pushed forward through burning villages, shattered towns, and open fields littered with wrecks, often climbing into a brand new Sherman the very next day after watching their previous tank destroyed. The sheer willpower of these men, combined with the endless production lines of American industry, kept the Sherman rolling. But for those who fought inside, the memory of battle remained forever etched in fire and smoke. The Sherman was not just a weapon of war, it was a coffin on treads, a machine that demanded sacrifice every time its engine roared to life. For all its flaws, the M4 Sherman possessed strengths that were often overlooked, strengths that, in the end, made it one of the most decisive weapons of World War II. What the Sherman lacked in raw power, it made up for in numbers, mobility, and adaptability. In the brutal chess game of war, one Sherman could rarely outgun a German Panther or Tiger. But what if there were not one, but 10? That was the American answer. By 1944, factories in Detroit and across the United States were producing Shermans at an astonishing rate, sometimes more than 1,000 tanks in a single month. For every Tiger the Germans managed to roll out, America could field dozens of Shermans. On the battlefield, this overwhelming tide mattered far more than one duel between steel giants. Sherman crews quickly learned to fight smart. Instead of charging head-on into the sights of an 88mm gun, they flanked, maneuvered, and attacked in packs. A lone Sherman was a target, but 5 Shermans working together could swarm a Tiger, striking from multiple directions until its thick armor was finally pierced. The losses were heavy, but the results were undeniable. The Germans could not replace their tanks or crews as quickly as the Americans could. Beyond sheer numbers, the Sherman was incredibly reliable. While German tanks often broke down due to complex engineering, the Sherman was simple, rugged, and easy to repair in the field. Crews could swap engines, tracks, or even turrets with minimal tools. Mechanics loved it because a Sherman could be patched up and sent back into battle in hours, while a disabled Panther might sit idle for days or never return at all. Its mobility was another hidden weapon. The Sherman could travel long distances without constant maintenance. It crossed muddy fields, snow-covered roads, and desert sands with surprising ease. In North Africa, in Italy, in France, and across the Pacific Islands, the Sherman proved it could go almost anywhere the infantry needed it. More than a tank, it was a workhorse that carried the war forward. Perhaps the Sherman's greatest strength, however, was its adaptability. It was not just a single design, but a platform for countless innovations. Engineers fitted it with flamethrowers to clear bunkers, rocket launchers for indirect fire, deep wading kits for amphibious landings, and powerful new guns like the British 17-pounder, turning the so-called Coffin into the deadly Firefly. No other tank of the war was modified into so many roles and used effectively in so many theaters. The Sherman's unexpected power lay not in its armor or its gun, but in its ability to be everywhere at once, in endless numbers, doing every job the war demanded. It was a tank that symbolized American industry, Allied cooperation, and the brutal logic of total war. Victory did not always belong to the strongest machine, but to the machine that never stopped coming. The true legacy of the Sherman was not just the tank itself, but the countless variants that evolved from its simple, flexible design. Each version answered a specific need on the battlefield, transforming the so-called coffin on tracks into one of the most versatile weapons of the war. The most famous was the Sherman Firefly, a British modification that mounted the powerful 17-pounder anti-tank gun. At last, Allied crews had a weapon that could stand toe-to-toe with the feared Tiger and Panther. Hidden among regular Shermans to avoid drawing fire, the Firefly could knock out German heavy tanks from over a kilometer away. For many crews, it was the first time they felt the odds were not hopelessly against them. Other variants focused on terror rather than precision. The Sherman Crocodile and other flamethrower conversions became nightmares for enemy infantry. In the Pacific, Japanese soldiers entrenched in caves and bunkers faced the horrifying roar of liquid fire pouring from the tank's nozzle. On Iwo Jima and Okinawa, these Shermans cleared positions that no rifle or grenade could reach, earning both fear and grudging respect from friend and foe alike. The Sherman was also adapted into specialized engineering machines. Some carried mine flails, whipping chains across the ground to clear deadly paths for infantry. Others bridged rivers, launched rockets, or even served as amphibious swimming tanks during the D-Day landings. Still more were converted into recovery vehicles, mobile artillery, or armored ambulances. Wherever a problem existed on the battlefield, the Sherman's chassis provided a solution. This adaptability gave the Allies a critical edge. German tanks were powerful but rigid, designed only for head-on duels. The Sherman, by contrast, was a shapeshifter, able to fill roles far beyond traditional tank combat. In the hands of creative engineers and determined crews, it became far more than the vulnerable machine it was first mocked to be. In the end, the deadly variants of the Sherman proved that its real strength lay not in perfection, but in transformation. From tank killer to flame-throwing monster, from bridge layer to artillery platform, the Sherman was whatever the war demanded it to be, and that versatility made it a weapon the Axis could never truly match. Behind every Sherman was not just steel and machinery, but 5 men whose lives were bound together inside its narrow hull. For them, the tank was both a weapon and a coffin. They knew the odds: thin armor, weaker guns, and the constant threat of fire. Many climbed into their vehicles each morning with the quiet knowledge that they might never climb out again. On the battlefields of Normandy, the Ardennes, and across the Pacific, countless Shermans burned. Crews were lost in seconds, their sacrifice marked only by the blackened wrecks left behind. In the aftermath, replacements were brought forward, and new men took their places, rolling into battle inside yet another Sherman. The cycle repeated day after day until the enemy was finally pushed back. And yet, from this tragedy came undeniable glory. The Sherman was not the most powerful tank of the war, but it was the most enduring. It broke through the hedgerows of France, punched across the Rhine into Germany, and crushed Japanese strongholds in the Pacific. It was there at the turning points, carrying the Allies forward when they needed it most. Today, rows of white crosses and solemn memorials remind us of the price paid by those who fought inside these machines. Their courage turned weakness into strength, and their sacrifice turned the flawed Sherman into a symbol of Allied victory. In tragedy, there was glory. In death, there was triumph. And in the steel coffin of the Sherman, thousands of men wrote their final chapter in the story of freedom. The M4 Sherman was never the strongest tank of World War II. It could not match the armor of the Tiger, nor the firepower of the Panther. To many who fought inside, it was a fragile coffin of steel. Yet history does not remember it as a failure. The Sherman was the tank that never stopped coming. It rolled off assembly lines in tens of thousands, crossed oceans, stormed beaches, and fought in every theater of the war. It carried the weight of Allied strategy, and with the courage of its crews, it broke through the walls of tyranny. Today, preserved in museums and memorials, the Sherman stands as a paradox, a machine of weakness that delivered victory, a symbol of sacrifice and resilience. It was the tank of tragedy and of triumph. The Sherman reminds us that in war, it is not always the strongest that prevails, but the most enduring.